Hi, this is Wilson Stribling. Please note this week's interview with Senator Josh Harkins and our weekly roundtable with Austin Barber and Brandon Jones were both recorded on Wednesday afternoon. That was after the Senate passed its revised tax cut plan, but before the House concurred and before the accidental language in the bill came to light. Each week, we have an in-depth conversation with one of the key players in the legislative process. This week, we welcome Senator Josh Harkins. Senator Harkins is a Republican from R-Flowood who has served in the state Senate since 2012. He is chairman of the Senate Finance Committee. Senator Josh Harkins, welcome to At Issue.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
We know you've been very busy, in particular with tax reform, which has been a big topic at the legislative session. It's been a big topic on At Issue so far this season. The House and Senate have now taken up the other chamber's tax proposals, largely replacing each other's tax cut language with their own. But there have been some changes from the Senate's original tax plan. Can you give us some of the key bullet points for where that plan is now?
So the main components of the tax feature of the plan are, there's not really that many changes, just the one change, and that's the trigger language. But all the provisions that we had in our original Senate plan are still the same. We take the grocery tax from 7% to 5% immediately in July. We raise the gas tax by 3 cents a year for 3 years. And the step down of the income tax rate from 4 by 0.25 for the next 4 years all the way down to 3% would still be the same. After that fourth year of lowering the income tax rate, we added a trigger. And that trigger basically said, we're going to let the economy dictate how much and how fast we cut the income tax all the way to elimination. And so right now, 1 point of income tax, when I say 1 point, 1 percentage point of the rate is worth about $400 million. It's about $407 million to cut that rate 1 point. So what we do is we say, if the prior year revenues and you take the following year appropriations, general fund appropriations, the surplus of that, meaning you have way more revenues than you do expenditures, that surplus is measured against the cost of a 1 point reduction. If it's 85% of that reduction cost of $400 million, we'll reduce the income tax by 0.20. So it would go from 3 to 2.8%. If the surplus that we talked about is 100%, meaning you have about $400 million in revenue surplus, then you would take 0.25. It would go from 3 to 275. And if you had 115% of that $400 million number, we would reduce the rate by 0.3. So you would go from 3 to 2.7%. So we're letting the economy dictate, meaning how much revenue is the state bringing in through the other sources of revenue, sales tax, use tax, corporate income tax, all the other fees the state collects. If those numbers warrant bringing in enough money versus our spending, and you have that surplus, that's going to dictate how much and how fast we eliminate the income tax. And I think it's a responsible way to do that.
What if there's no surplus?
And you won't cut.
So it would stay at the level
stay the
that
same
it's drawn
level
down
at
to
whatever the
that point.
prior year income tax rate is.
And then would the process resume the next year?
The next year, you take a snapshot look again. What does 1% cost? And you would use your surplus and your expenses. Now, hypothetically, if you had $250 million extra, that wouldn't meet the bottom part of the trigger to warrant a 0.2 of a point cut. So you would have to wait till next year. But you have $250 million. If you don't raise your spending too much, you have a $250 million jump start. So with any modest growth, you should reach that 85% point, which is the lowest part of the trigger, to allow for a 0.2 of a point cut.
So where does the Senate plan stand right now? What's next in the process?
Well, we passed it off the floor yesterday. It was held on a motion to reconsider. We tabled that motion today, so it will go back to the House. They have until Friday to either concur or invite conference, and it's my hope that they will concur in that plan, because this plan does two things. One, it addresses income tax, but it also addresses our and income tax is about a $2 billion issue. It also addresses our PERS problem, which is about a $25.8 billion issue that we have going forward. And what it does by addressing it is it creates a fifth tier, which we've talked about all session long and all off season before the session started, about the predicament we're in with our pension system and the unsustainable formula that we have right now with the current tiers. So we need to create a new tier for new employees to go in, so that our pension system will be strong and will be solvent for future generations of employees and retirees.
You talk about those tiers. Elaborate on that for me a little bit.
So the pension system has had several tiers of employees. The first tier had a certain criteria of you had to serve 25 years, I guess, and you could retire and start drawing your pension benefits. Then they said, well, that's probably not good. If people go to work for the state at 18 years of age, work 25 years, they're still eligible to work. They're retiring, starting to draw their retirement. We need to change it. So Tier 2 had some incremental changes. Tier 3 had incremental changes. Tier 4, the latest tier that is currently available to new hires in the state in public service, whether it's through your city, county, police department, school system, IHL, or community college, is a fourth tier. You have to serve 30 years of service before you're eligible for retirement or age 65. And it just basically says that that's the parameters you have for retirement. And it basically lists out your retirement with your COLA but the way it's set up right now, it's not sustainable. That's, for several reasons. One, we've shrunk the size of government. We said we're going to deal with a smaller government. We have shrunk the size of government. We've tried to get more efficient with our services, and we don't need as many employees. Well, that's problematic when you all the employees put into the system, and so it holds it up. And also the market has played a role in it. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to salvage the pension system for future generations. We have $35 billion in assets. We're not going broke today. That's not an issue of today, but there is a $25 billion liability that sits out there. And all of our cities, our counties, our school districts are all part of that. They each have a share of that $25 billion price tag. And so that debt, that liability, and I don't call it a debt, but it's a liability, but that goes with them. So when they try to bond, that's considered on their books as far as their balance sheet. So it's something that we need to address. And by creating a fifth tier, you're kind of drawing a line in the sand and saying, okay, everybody that's a new hire after the date of this new tier going into effect, they'll go into this system. And this system is set up that the funding mechanism of it is self-funded. So you should not have the problems that we're having right now with being about 59% funded.
Back to the tax cut legislation, the Speaker, you mentioned triggers. The Speaker of the House, Jason White, has said he's open to triggers in that legislation, but only if they're based on revenue levels. What do you make of that? Well,
I think that revenues play a part of it, but your spending also plays a part of it. You can't just spend willy-nilly and eat up all the excess and expect to cut the income tax. A responsible method of cutting taxes is to make sure you can pay for it as you go. And that's why we included spending as part of the revenue trigger. You take the prior year's expenses and subtract out the current year's spending, and that gives you a surplus. And if you have a surplus, you have extra funds that you can cut from. And if you just have enough to cut the rate and leaves you with no excess, then you're going to wind up borrowing money to perform the year-to-year functions that the state has to keep up with all of our properties across the state, IHL, community colleges, state-owned buildings. They're constantly needing updating and repairs and maintenance. And, we spend probably $250 million a year to some years $300 million a year, which some of that includes projects, but anywhere from about $185 to $225 million a year is just on state properties and state agencies. And so by not having spending as part of it, I think you're setting yourself up for using any excess revenue to eliminate the rate and then having no money to maintain your property. So therefore, what do? You put it on the credit card. And that's not what we're going to do. That's not what the Senate position is. We're saying we're going to pay as we go. And I think that's the responsible and fiscally conservative steps to take.
Austin Barber and Brandon Jones will be joining us a little bit later on at issue. And Brandon has said several times on this program, as have some other Democrats, that given the uncertainty with federal funding on which Mississippi has depended for so many years, and given the fact that so much COVID-related money that we've enjoyed since the pandemic is that's coming to an end soon, that it borders on irresponsibility to even talk about eliminating a positive stream of revenue through taxes. Mm-hmm. So why now? Why
Well,
spend so much time and effort on cutting taxes now?
I think that statement may be true if you don't have a trigger. That the point of a trigger is to keep the guardrails up to prevent you from going off the cliff, and that's what we want to make sure we do. We want to make sure that we do not wreck the budget and do something irresponsibly. Everybody talks about the Kansas example, but what they did was they made decisions that were irresponsible and didn't have any guardrails set up, and they had to come back and change their tax policy. I think they had to raise taxes. And so what we want to make sure of is that there is excess revenue. If there is no excess revenue, we don't cut. And I don't think how much we can make it any clearer that we're not just going to go and cut into the future to eliminate the income tax without there being economic activity to prove that the economy is strong and we're bringing in excess revenue. And if there is excess revenue, who better to give it to than the working men and women of the state of Mississippi?
Another point that Brandon has made on this program is that he says that nobody's asking for this. So who is asking this aside from the governor? Who is asking for tax cuts and elimination of the state income tax?
I think the policy itself is that you give working Mississippians more of their own money and you let them dictate where they spend it. We need to be strategic and very efficient in the monies that we take. The monies the state has is because we took it from somebody through taxing. So if we're not going to be diligent and good stewards of the taxpayers' money, then what are we doing here? And so I would say that to Brandon and anybody that's like, well, nobody's really asking for it, but what we're trying to do is we're trying to make Mississippi a place that people want to live in, that people want to come to, that your children don't have to go off and move somewhere else to find a job and to raise their family. Because I know the dream of probably every grandparent is to have their grandkids close. And so what can we do to make Mississippi the most prosperous place in the country is to provide economic freedom, to provide prosperity, the prospects of prosperity, and to have low taxes. And low taxes meaning workers get to keep more of their hard-earned money. We already exempted income tax off of retirement income for retirees. They don't pay any taxes on their income. We want the workers to join that crowd, but we need to do so responsibly. I recognize the weight of what we're doing, and I would not vote for or push a policy that didn't have some responsible mechanisms by which to cut. Now, we put up plans that have just said, hey, we're going to take a cut and see approach, cut 4 years and revisit it. But if you have parameters around how the triggers move forward, then you can rest comfortably knowing that if we did cut the rate, it's because we had at least $340 million of excess revenue over what our expenses are. Now, there's room to grow spending if it's needed. If there's an investment in education, if there's costs that have to be incurred for whatever reasons. There's also a component of this plan that's Senate position is that we're going to increase our rainy day fund from 10% of appropriations to 12% of revenue, and then eventually by 2030 take that up to 13% of revenue. If you are going to get rid of one of your major sources of revenue, then you should have a healthier rainy day fund.
So walk us through the process from here. Both these bills go to conference now?
Well, no. Right now, their bill, with the changes they made, will come over to our chamber. We'll get a chance to look at it tomorrow. And our bill was tabled today, so it'll go over to the House. They'll get a chance to look at our bill. We can meet and visit, and by Friday, you have to either concur or invite conference. So if they feel like our plan is responsible and they feel like that's something they can live with, that gives a pathway to income tax elimination, which is what the Speaker and the House and the governor have all indicated they were looking for, there's the plan.
And I should point out for our listeners that we're having this conversation on Wednesday, and so that's when we speak of yesterday and Friday and that type of thing. That's what we're referring to. When it gets to if and when these bills get to conference, what happens at that point? Can you give we picture sometimes a smoke-filled room and people having
well, I don't smoke, so it won't be smoke-filled.
It's an old-fashioned image.
It'll be a well, we still have the smokers table in the Senate chamber, so we do introduce people that are sitting at the smokers table that way. But
what goes on inside those conference meetings? These
conference meetings, and I can say this as being chairman of finance over the past 5-6 years, they occur in the hallway, they occur in a closet, they occur in an office, they occur in wherever you may be. If you pass each other at lunch, anywhere you can have a conversation about the topic and, okay, let's address this issue. And I think it comes down to what are the key components that the House can live with, what are the key components that the Senate can live with, and if you have consensus among the houses, then you have a bill. And there's some things that the Senate can't do, and I think the House knows that, and there's some things that the House didn't want to live with, and I think we addressed the main one, which was a pathway. That was really the main kicker of what I heard coming from them, is that they would like a pathway to elimination, and we have delivered a pathway to elimination that is responsible and pays for it as you go. And if the economy is not performing, then the cuts won't take place.
Are you confident that there will be a bill for the governor to sign before the end of the session?
Confident. I'm confident there's a bill, yeah, because we passed one. Am I confident that the House will take it? I don't know yet. I will. I had a meeting with Chairman Lamar yesterday. We visited briefly, and I told him, I was like, once you get the bill, let's get together and let's explain what each side, the changes, because their bill changed from their prior version. They've changed the kind of the guts of their bill a little bit and did some different things. But I've told them that there's not an appetite on our side to raise sales tax to do this. We want to leave the sales tax where it is and not raise sales tax on Mississippians and just use the economy to do this. And look, one way to do it is to raise taxes in other areas to bring in revenue to offset it. The other way is to let the economy dictate it or to make cuts. And I didn't see really any substantial cuts coming from anywhere this session for anybody to say, hey, here's $100 million of cuts that we can use to help lower the income tax rate. Now, $100 million would drop it 0.25. So you got to find a lot of $100 million out there to drop the rate from where we are today at 4.4, and it's going to 4% next year. But from 4 all the way down to 0, there's a lot of $100 million obstacles you got to get around. And I think that's why it's best to let the economy dictate it and let the economy kind of be our guide with these triggers.
Senator Josh Harkins, we thank you for joining us on that issue.
Thank you very much for having me, Wilson.